The price of rampant mass shootings is that no one ever feels safe in public. This is destroying the social fabric of our country. Some firecrackers went off in a crowd in Florida, and people reacted reasonably given what has happened in Highland Park, Uvalde, Buffalo, etc. And, that makes a lot of sense. If you've seen footage of the Highland Park shooting, there were people who, after the shooting started, they weren't aware if it was actually gunfire or if it was fireworks. Some people didn't react at all because they thought it might have just been fireworks. So now here we see the inverse, where people didn't know if it was gunfire or if it was fireworks because they live in the only country where this regularly happens. It is a completely reasonable response to be afraid in this situation, considering the same day the Highland Park shooting happened at a July 4th parade. That's just the state of our country. So because we live in hell, and we just seem to continue to descend further and further into that hell world, in the most American way possible on the 4th of July that has passed at the time of recording this video, there was actually more than one mass shooting on the 4th of July, but the one that's getting a lot of press coverage, because we live in a country where you gotta pick and choose which mass shootings you want to focus on because there are just so many of them. Highland Park in Illinois was subject to a mass shooting during a 4th of July parade. CNN reports hours after gunfire interrupted the Highland Park, Illinois July 4th parade, killing 7 people and wounding dozens more. Police apprehended the man they believe was responsible. Like always, I don't give a shit about this person's name. 21 years old, faces 7 charges of first-degree murder in connection with the shooting, which authorities said he allegedly carried out by climbing onto the rooftop of nearby businesses and opening fire minutes after the parade started, sending parade goers and participants running for safety. Investigators believe the suspect planned the attack for weeks. Chris Cavelli, spokesperson for the Lake County Major Crimes Task Force, said at one of several news conferences Tuesday. Suspect dressed in women's clothing, we'll get back to that later, to help conceal his identity, Cavelli said. Blended in with the crowds as they fled the area and went to his mother's house. Law enforcement has yet to establish a motive, and Cavelli declined to address a potential motive again Wednesday, saying only that the shooter had, quote, some type of affinity towards the number 4 and 7, and inverse was 7-4, the date of July 4th. Cavelli previously said there had been no information to suggest the attack was, quote, racially motivated by religion, or any other protected status. There was no indication anyone else was involved, Cavelli said. So the shooter faces a sentence of life in prison without parole if convicted, which is nice, in addition to 7 first-degree murder charges. And apparently there are many more coming. Keep them coming. Those are rookie numbers. So, most importantly, and many people are noting this, when it comes to this story, the shooter legally obtained the weapon used, officials say, which seems to be a recurring theme. Now, you might be wondering, oh, well, if he legally acquired it, then surely gun regulations that have been shown through the data to be effective can't possibly be effective. We'll get into that. The suspect used a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 semi-automatic rifle to carry out the shooting, Dillon, the assistant state's attorney, said at Wednesday's bond hearing. According to Dillon, the shooter told investigators that when he climbed on top of the roof, he looked through the weapon sights and opened fire at people across the street, emptying 2 30-round magazines before loading the weapon with a third and continuing to fire. Surveillance video from the scene showed a person running west with a black bag over their shoulder immediately after the shooting. Dillon said Wednesday, when the individual was running, an object wrapped in cloth fell onto the pavement. Subject left the object and continued running. Turns out to be the Smith & Wesson per Dillon, and on the rooftop, investigators found the 3 magazines and 83 spent shell casings. The suspect legally purchased the weapon he used in Monday's shooting, Cavelli said Tuesday, describing it as a, quote, high-powered rifle that shot high-velocity rounds. The weapon, which he described as, quote, similar to an AR-15, was purchased locally, Cavelli said, within the Chicagoland area. There is no indication the weapon was modified, he said. Shooter also illegally purchased a second rifle found in his vehicle at the time he was apprehended, as well as other guns recovered from his home, which Cavelli described as pistols. So this is the interesting part. Between June 2020 and September 2021, the shooter passed 4 background checks while purchasing firearms. Those background checks went through the Firearms Transaction Inquiry Program, the FTIP, which includes the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, state police said in their statement. At the time, the only criminal offense included in the shooter's history was a January 2016 ordinance violation for possession of tobacco, and no mental health prohibitor reports were submitted to state police by healthcare facilities or personnel, police said. Police in Highwood, the suspect's hometown just outside Highland Park, had no prior crime-related interactions with the shooter, according to Chief Dave Wentz. So, some dumbasses might be like, oh, well, how can background checks be effective if it is the case that he was able to get past all the background checks and still get the firearm? We'll get into that. Hold your horses. Police took knives from the home after the shooter said he would kill people. The shooter did have past interactions with Highland Park police. In April 2019, local police had gone to the family home after receiving a report the shooter had tried to take his own life a week earlier. Officers spoke with him and his parents and were told mental health professionals were handling the matter, Cavelli said. Then, in September 2019, Highland Park police went to the shooter's home after a family member reported that he had said he was going to kill everyone, according to Cavelli. Quote, the threat was directed at family inside of the home, he said. So, most reasonable people, I'm assuming, would take that information and be like, huh, well, this is potentially worrying. Maybe a person with this kind of a history probably shouldn't be able to purchase firearms. I think that's a reasonable case to be made. You know, if the person seems to be a clear and present threat to their own safety and the safety of those around them, perhaps they should not be able to gain access to firearms. Myself, as an advocate for responsible gun ownership, am a big fan of people like this not getting firearms, whereas people with not a history like this should be able to get the firearms after going through extensive background checks, red flag laws, wait times for gun purchases, and a variety of other firearm regulation that have proven to be effective. Now, of course, as always, the United States is a different context. There are more guns than there are people. We have the Second Amendment. You can't apply one-to-one the gun regulation across the pond to the United States. I'm aware of that. However, I think we can all agree that there are certain people that probably shouldn't have access to them because those people might go on to do insane shit like we saw on July 4th. Police confiscated a collection of bladed items, 16 knives, a dagger, and a sword, but made no arrests because there were no signed complaints against the shooter. Highland Park police notified state police about the visit. At the time, involuntary commitment wasn't an option, Cavelli said. The local police submitted a, quote, clear and present danger report about the visit to the Illinois State Police, the agency said. Quote, the report indicates when police went to the home and asked the individual if he felt like harming himself or others, he responded no. Well, thank God. Let's just take his word for it. Fuck it. Said no. What more could you possibly want? Quote, additionally and importantly, the father claimed the knives were his, and they were being stored in the individual's closet for safekeeping. Surely. Because, you know, I just keep my collection of 16 plus bladed items and weapons in my son's closet. So there's where else am I going to put them? In some kind of locked cabinet, maybe? Who has the space for that? In our suburban home. Based upon that information, the Highland Park police returned the knives to the father later that afternoon, state police added. So, like, I don't know, man. Sure, they could be the father's weapons, but I don't think that makes it any better. Given the fact that there was a clear and present danger report, the shooter had threatened that he was going to, quote, kill everyone, and is also a threat to his own security, his own life. Like, come on, man. Like, if I'm a father and I see all this shit happening, I'm not gonna keep 16 plus bladed weapons in my son, who has been seen to be a threat to his safety and the safety of others, room. I'm just not going to do that. I feel like any reasonable person is just not going to do that. Major blunder on the part of this father here. Apparently one of many. State Police Master Sergeant Delilah Garcia said they looked at whether the shooter had a firearm owner's identification, FOID card, that should have been revoked, but he had no card at this time, we should add. In a news release, Illinois State Police officials said the shooter in December 2019 applied for a FOID card that was sponsored by his father. Oh, thank God. Because, you know, the dad that keeps the 16 plus bladed weapons in his son's closet for safekeeping, who has ignored the threats to his own child's safety and the safety of others. Thank God we have his sponsorship. Now that's a good stamp of approval right there. If I'm a person that's going to be issuing a license to own a firearm to another person. Quote, the subject was under 21, he was 19, and the application was sponsored by the subject's father. Therefore, at the time of FOID application review in January of 2020, there was insufficient basis to establish a clear and present danger and deny the FOID application, state police said. Thank God. Cavelli said later that the suspect bought 5 guns, including 2 rifles, after the September visit from police. Just another one of these, the suspect, they were on our radar. We were aware of the suspect. Too little too late. People have already died. Others have been wounded. Countless lives have been traumatized. He, quote, contemplated a second attack. After fleeing the scene of the parade shooting, the shooter drove to Madison, Wisconsin, where he, quote, seriously contemplated carrying out another attack with the firearm he had in his car at the time. Quote, investigators did develop some information that it appears when he drove to Madison, he was driving around. However, he did see a celebration that was occurring in Madison, and he seriously contemplated using the firearm he had in his vehicle to commit another shooting in Madison, he said. Quote, we don't have information to suggest he planned to drive to Madison initially to commit another attack. We do believe he was driving around following the first attack and saw the celebration, but the suspect did not carry out the second attack, thank fucking God. Cavelli added, saying, quote, indications are that he hadn't put enough thought or research into it, which is an interesting thing to say. Hadn't put enough thought or research into it, which seems to suggest that he might have put enough thought or research into the first attack in Highland Park, which might become relevant later. He posted violent imagery online. The suspected shooter posted music on several streaming platforms, apparently made and posted music videos online featuring ominous lyrics and animated scenes of gun violence. So you can see this in a variety of musicians who haven't committed mass shootings or been implicated in any kind of violence. So it's not like a one-to-one, oh, ladies and gentlemen, we got him kind of situation. But given the additional information of the threat to his own life, the threat to the lives of his family, there's more connection here than there might be otherwise. But of course, at this point, it's speculation, I guess, as to like how connected it is. In one video, cartoon animation of a stick figure shooter resembling the suspect's appearance is seen wearing tactical gear and carrying out an attack with a rifle. Shooter seen with multicolored hair and face tattoos narrates, quote, "I just need to do it. It is my destiny." In another video, similar stick figure resembling the suspect was depicted lying down on the floor in a pool of his own blood, surrounded by police officers with their guns drawn. Law enforcement is reviewing the videos posted online, Cavelli said in Tuesday's news conference, noting police had not previously been made aware of them. Thank fucking God for that. The mountain of evidence that was readily available about the suspect that had been already issued a clear and present danger warning in the past, quote, "We'll look at them and see what they reveal." Several of the suspect's online postings, quote, "reflected a plan and a desire to commit carnage for a long time in advance," Highland Park Mayor Nancy Rotering said in an interview with NBC's Hoda Cobb on Today. Quote, "And it's one of those things where you step back and you say, what happened? How did somebody become this angry and hateful? To take it out on innocent people who literally were just having a family day out. And we'll get to that soon. Do not worry. Stay tuned." The YouTube and Spotify, whatnot, took the shit down. His uncle said he saw no warning signs. I don't know how closely you were looking. So, after all this cringe, after all this fucking devastating news, of course we've got the usual suspects on the conservative, the right-wing side of the fence that don't generally seem to take the issue of mass shootings seriously in any capacity whatsoever. In fact, they oppose policy that might make them less likely to happen, which is really weird. We've got the usual suspects. We've got Lauren Boebert, who recently won her primary. Quote, "There was just a mass shooting in Denmark, a country with some of the strictest gun laws in Europe. It's time to admit that gun laws do not stop mass." This the galaxy brain of this stupid fuck. So Kasim Rashid on Twitter writes, "Denmark's July 4th, 2022 mass shooting was their first mass shooting since 1994. So Denmark's most recent mass shooting happened a year before I was born. The July 4th, 2022 Highland Park mass shooting was USA's first mass shooting since the July 4th, 2022 Richmond mass shooting. Because like I noted before, there was more than one that happened on the 4th. One mass shooting every 30 years versus one mass shooting every 3 hours. It's almost like the context of Denmark is different, and they're in a position where they don't have more guns than our people. Obviously, like I say before, the context is different, and you do have to tailor gun legislation and regulation to the context of the United States, where we have the Second Amendment, where we have people, like myself included, that advocate for responsible firearm ownership and gun regulation that have been shown to be beneficial and helpful. The regulation I propose, red flag laws, wait times for gun purchases, could have played a part in stopping this specific mass shooting and others, like the Uvalde one. Now, people will say, well, oh, if people are going to do illegal things with the guns, well, they're just going to get them illegally anyway, so what's the point of the law? Well, you're going to make it harder, at least. It's significantly easier to obtain the firearm legally than to have to know a guy who knows a guy to go through back alley fucking third-party channels in order to get the firearm. It's going to be a lot harder to do that, and that amount of difficulty might make somebody spend more time thinking about, is this the thing I should actually do? And maybe they have more time to figure out, no, I probably shouldn't. Maybe they have time to get help. Maybe there's time for people around them to intervene and get them the help they need. Maybe they just don't get the firearms at all because they don't know how to get them outside of the legal purchase. Don't be stupid. Don't be a fucking idiot. Anyway. We've also got a fucking insane tweet thread from Scott Adams of Dilbert fame. So this is a compilation of screenshots from Know Nothing, one of my oomfies. Prominent Trump supporter, Scott Adams, quote, "Can one movie nudge a young person into violence and anarchy? A bad movie can't. Even a good movie can't do that. But Joker can. That movie is next level persuasion-wise." So that's talking about Joaquin Phoenix's Joker. Just another right-winger, another conservative not being able to analyze media. Media analysis, just non-existent. But anyway, this is from June 3rd, 2020. This is from May 22nd, 2022. Quote, "If we made it legal for kids to kill their bullies, a lot of problems would go away." What are we talking about? Quote, "We'd create new problems, sure, but how could those new problems be worse?" So if we're talking about kids and their bullies, we're going to assume that the kids that are being bullied by people that are around their age. So you would hope that the families, the school districts, the state could intervene and hopefully teach the bullies that they shouldn't be doing that. And this has actually been successful in a variety of places. Rates of bullying have gone down after certain programs have been adopted by school districts. I don't think we're at the point where children need to be given license by Scott Adams to kill their bullies. What are we talking about? quote, "This is a thought experiment, not a recommendation." So at least we have that caveat. You know, Scott Adams is not saying that it should be legal for kids to, quote, kill their bullies. Rather, it's just just an idea, just a high-level idea, that we gotta maybe there's nothing here. You're a fucking moron. You made a comic that made you a lot of money, and now you have an outsized amount of influence, and you sucked Trump's dick for a while to get a bunch of people to follow you past your prime. Quote, "If I were to invent a solution to the dangerous young man problem," so this is from July 6th, 2022, 2 days after the shooting, but the Highland Park one we imagine is what we're referencing. Quote, "If I were to invent a solution to the dangerous young man problem, I think it would involve putting them all in one place so they could only hurt each other, not necessarily in jail, just away from society. Once they are separated from society and drugs, maybe help is possible." What? How do you have so little hope for your fellow human beings to be able to address these problems outside of making it legal for kids to, quote, kill their bullies? Or alternatively, make a fucking separate island nation for young men in society? Surely that can't be abused if that was to happen. Like, these are the solutions that the right wing has for the fucking mass shooting problem. These are the people that are constantly telling you that gun regulations can't work. Like, oh, it's not gonna work. You do Denmark, they've got one mass shooting from 1994, and now another one's happened July 4th, 2022, in that amount of time. Obviously, their gun laws don't work. Surely we can't apply some of those and fit them to the context of the United States with any efficacy. Quote, "When a young male, let's say 14 to 19, is a danger to himself and others, society gives the supporting family two options." So this is in Scott Adams' view, his demented worldview. 1, watch people die. 2, kill your own son. Those are the only options. I chose number 1 and watched my stepson die. I was relieved he took no one else with him. Quote, "If you think there is a third choice in which your wisdom and tough love, along with government services, quote, fixes that broken young man, you are living in a delusion. There are no other options. You have to either murder your own son or watch him die and maybe kill others." So he's talking about how his stepson apparently died of a fentanyl overdose, which is absolutely tragic. I would not want anybody, 1, to die from a fentanyl overdose, and 2, I would want no parent or step-parent or any loved one family member of this person to have to go through that. Like, that's devastating. He says, quote, "There are only two options. Watch people die, kill your own son." So he's already given up. He's given up. Fuck it. There's nothing you could do. Surely these young men who have a history of being seen by police as a threat to themselves and others, having had a history of violent imagery in connection to the fact that they had 16 plus bladed weapons in their room, surely none of that could be used in a way that could make it illegal for that person to be given a firearm and then make it harder for them to get the firearm that they would do the evil shit they did with it, instead of legally being able to purchase a variety of fucking firearms to do it. Surely not. Surely you just have to watch people die or kill your own son. That's what Scott Adams says. Conservative parenting, not even once. Like, it's getting to the point, given all of the fucking child abuse shit that conservatives do on a daily basis when it comes to fucking spanking, when it comes to the verbal abuse that they do to their kids, especially when it comes to their kids being not of the religion they are, or when it comes to their kids being any kind of LGBTQIA+, the amount of fucking abuse that they suffer from that, the prevalence of homelessness in LGBTQ youth who have been kicked out of their fucking homes by their bigoted parents. Like, it seems like, I don't know how we're allowing conservatives to continue to be around children. Like, these are warning signs. Fucking the sirens are blaring. What are we talking about here? And of course it goes on. Also, because why wouldn't she? We've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, thank God, the Jewish space laser lady, apparently suggesting that it was, quote, a false flag. Let's just listen. What deranged lunatic ravings are we about to be subjected to? Content warning, Marjorie Taylor Greene, let's go.
Now, here's what I have to say. 2 shootings on July 4th, one in a rich white neighborhood and the other at a fireworks display. It almost sounds like it's designed to persuade Republicans to go along with more gun control.
So for one, they're not designed. But for 2, the fact that these mass shootings happened, you would hope would provoke more people to be in favor of common sense gun regulation, like the ones that I've mentioned, which would have made the Uvalde shooter have more difficulty accessing the firearm that they used, and would have made it harder for the Highland Park shooter to access the firearm that they used. Maybe. Obviously not to Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course. Marjorie Taylor Greene sees these things, and immediately her fucking conspiracy brain goes fucking haywire. Her history of anti-Semitic conspiracies as well. So I haven't even mentioned it yet, but so I'm not making any accusations that Marjorie Taylor Greene is basing this conspiracy off of this. But the fact that she has a history of anti-Semitism just jogs my memory that Highland Park has a massive population of Jewish people. There are 3 synagogues, I believe, in the area, and that'll become relevant later. But Jesus Christ, like, no sane person hears about 2 mass shootings that happen on ostensibly the day where we celebrate America and its independence and how great it is. Like, no sane person thinks this way.
I mean, after all, remember, we didn't see that happen at all the pride parades in the month of June.
And I'm sure that's just so terrible for you, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Considering, yes, as Zebra said in the chat, Marjorie Taylor Greene has advocated for violence against trans people on Alex Jones's show, another noted conspiracy theorist with a history of making up conspiracy about mass shootings vis-a-vis Sandy Hook. I'm sure that was so terrible for you to see that no mass shootings happened at pride parades. That's such a shame for you, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
But as soon as we hit MAGA month, as soon as we hit the month that we're all celebrating, loving our country, we have shootings on July 4th. I mean, that's, that would sound like a conspiracy.
That would sound like a conspiracy. Oh my God. Can you imagine that any reasonable person, when they talk about the fact that there's a mass shooting, 2 of them that happened on July 4th, and we're gonna, as right-wingers, completely sidestep any actual ways that could solve the problem and instead talk about it? It's a false flag. It's a conspiracy. No way. That's so crazy. This woman is a demon. This woman is a demon. She sought a pardon after Jan 6th and was out of pocket on Jan 6th as well. She should not be in Congress. And this isn't the first reason why. Jesus Christ. The fuck is you doing? America, how is this an elected representative? Please tell me. How does this happen? She's a demon. Like, if evil exists, you're looking at it. A wise man once said, when fascism comes to the United States, it's going to be draped in the American flag and carrying a Bible. You're looking at it.
But what's the definition of a right-wing conspiracy theory? Well, by the way, it's the news that's just 6 months early.
Except it never is. There have been virtually 0 right-wing conspiracy theories that have turned out to be true. But she knows this. I don't know, maybe I have too much hope from humanity. Maybe she's too far gone. I don't know. But I feel like she's aware of the fact at some level that she's bullshitting. But I mean, I could be wrong. She could just be literally insane. So thank God we have right-wingers on the case as it pertains to solving gun crime. Thank God. I'm so excited. So, luckily, as we would all expect, in the wake of a mass shooting, well, of course, because as it would almost always turn out, the mass shooters tend to lean right-wing, and I will show you data to support that in a second. But because these mass shooters, because the domestic terrorism that happens in the United States is overwhelmingly perpetrated by right-wingers and white supremacists, of course the right has to go all in on, oh, the shooter was trans, the shooter was a leftist, it was Antifa. Believe me, folks, they're evil people. They're terrible, okay? They hate our country, right? Of course they have to. So luckily, Shoeonhead came out here and put out a good thread debunking the quote-unquote shooter was a leftist claims, because for some reason, despite the killing not being politically motivated, as far as we know at the time of the posting of this, people are desperate to score points. A threat. 1. I'm seeing this collage of pics going around. This isn't even his tattoo or arm. It's literally the first result when you Google socialist tattoo. The Fed hat, however, is another story. As someone who owns a Fed jacket, I plead the Fifth. 2. All those lib likes came from a quote fan account, not any of his official Twitter accounts. So apparently a fan account was liking a bunch of shit, but it wasn't the official one. Who knows if this was him role-playing as his own fans or not, but it was nevertheless a fan page. 3, quote-unquote Antifa hat. Apparently the most redacted one out of all of these. Yes, I'm sure there's no other reason why someone named the name of his rapper stage name was Awake, would have an A on his hat. No shit. Also, that's not the anarchist A. That's not what that looks like. It's just an A. 4, this Instagram page was made today at the time of posting this, and anyone who falls for this one is 12 IQ, so it was made the day of the shooting, this page. And one of these images says, quote, yes, hello, I'm a product of MK Ultra and a liberal. Come on, you got brain disease. 5, the way he looks is irrelevant to his politics. Tom McDonald's looks like this, who, is a famously conservative rapper. It's just a modern rap artist aesthetic, which is very true. This should go without saying. Also, I thought it went without saying. I have no idea what he is. I'm not implying anything, just debunking face posts I see going around. There are photos of him at Trump rallies, but it's unclear if he is there to mock or not. I guess we just wait to see motivation if there is any. Turns out he's been to a variety of these Trump rallies. Turns out he was also at one where there was a thin blue line flag being waved. So it's not really a hop, skip, and a jump to assume that this person was a right-winger. Now, it's not to say that the shooting was motivated by those politics, but it can inform some of the beliefs a person holds, and it can inform some of the things that would go into producing the mind state of a person that might make them want to do this kind of shit. The rampant conspiracism by people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, etc., on the right has provoked a lot of people, like the Great Replacement conspiracy theory that the Buffalo shooter cited, to do these violent acts. So it is important to know about the media and the politics of the person who perpetrated these crimes. It doesn't necessarily draw any kind of motivation, but rather can inform a variety of other things that can be useful for people who hopefully want to stop mass shootings from happening, instead of right-wingers like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Scott Adams, and Lauren Boebert, who seem to not really care that they happen and oppose all legislation that might make them happen less. And we'll get into, potential reasons for why they do that as well. So, as it pertains to the fact that domestic terrorism in the United States is overwhelmingly perpetrated by right-wingers, here we have some data from the ADL, and because we're talking about it, if you don't like the ADL for whatever reason, the Southern Poverty Law Center has similar figures, which you could also look at if you would like. Domestic extremist-related killings, as per the ADL, in the United States by perpetrator affiliation from 2012 to 2021. Right-wing extremists are responsible for the great majority of extremist-related murders, so it's 443 total deaths in that time frame. Right-wing extremism, all movements, 75%. Left-wing extremism, including anarchists and black nationalists, 4%. And like I say, you could argue that black nationalists could fall into right-wing extremism. Domestic Islamist extremism, 20%, you could also argue fall into right-wing extremism. And other miscellaneous extremism, 1%. The reason why they separate these out is because they're specifically talking about white supremacy, white nationalism, and that sphere when analyzing this data. But if you wanted to, you could combine, in the general sense, right-wing extremism, because domestic Islamist extremism is almost always right-wing. That's like 95%, and you could add more to that if you want. Like, it's the overwhelming majority is right-wing in this country. Right-wing extremist-related killings in the U.S. by perpetrator affiliation 2012 to 2021. 333 total deaths, more than 3 out of 4 killings committed by right-wing extremists in the U.S. are committed by white supremacists. Shocker. White supremacy, 73%, anti-government extremism, 18%, incel/manosphere extremism, 5%, and then anti-abortion and other right-wing extremism, 3%. And all of these do have overlap. They're trying to separate them out because it can be useful to have data that has these very specific niches, because the methods to target those to try to de-radicalize people, et cetera, and stop this from happening can differ depending on which of these you're looking at. But white supremacy usually has its part to play in all of these. So, if any time a right-winger, whenever a mass shooting happens, like what happened in Uvalde, for instance, where 2 innocent trans women were smeared online after a Uvalde school shooting, we talked about this in the previous video, Candace Owens' deranged anti-trans lies, which you can see, there'll be a link in the description, it'll pop up. There were 2 trans women online who were claimed by people on the internet, on 4chan, that they were the Uvalde shooter, even though the Uvalde shooter was killed at the scene of the crime, and those 2 people were still alive, so very clearly it's not the same person. But the right wing wants to claim that they were trans and try to get that story out there right after the shootings happen. 1, because they don't like trans people, and any amount of fuel on the fire they can bring to the oppression that trans people are facing and the ramping oppression that they're facing across this country. That's a goal for them, obviously, because they don't want trans people to exist. And it also covers their ass when it comes to the fact that they are actually more likely to do domestic terrorism. So if you can project, as right-wingers always do, that, oh no, it was leftists, it was Antifa, it was a trans woman, they're the ones who did it. If you can project that they were the ones who are doing it, and you can smear people and lie about the shooters being those identities, you can kind of, throw smoke in the eyes, throw sand in the eyes, put a smoke, cloud out there in the way of all this data about how it's right-wingers that are doing the majority of domestic terrorism in this country. And they are the biggest threat to domestic security as it pertains to terrorism in this country. So this anti-trans rhetoric, as it always happens, and the reason why they said this about the Highland Park shooter was because he apparently wore women's clothes to disguise himself, but he was not trans. There is no evidence to support the idea that he was trans. Simply wearing feminine clothing doesn't make a man trans. That kind of anti-trans rhetoric has ramped up significantly, and we'll continue to go into it, but I figured we would take a brief detour for some levity when it comes to Jordan Peterson, who recently put out this fucking manifesto about the fact that he got banned on Twitter for very obviously breaking TOS as it pertains to misgendering and dead-naming actor Elliot Page, which was all just a scheme in order to drum up a media circus around his ban and then promote the fact that he now has a show on Daily Wire. Pretty easy to figure that out. When it comes to Elliot Page and the tweet that Jordan Peterson put out, talking about a so-called criminal butcher or criminal doctor or whatever who performed Elliot Page's top surgery, as well as his general disdain for trans people overall, he had some interesting stuff to say. So let's hear it. I've skipped forward in the video a little bit. It's a lot of deranged ramblings, so I had to try to pick out the pieces that were most interesting.
When precisely was it incumbent on me to switch my terminology in regard to Elliot/Ellen so that I was not engaging in hateful conduct. And how can I describe the fact that someone who was once a woman, and really still is, had her breasts cut off because she, he, they, their, them had fallen prey to a viciously harmful fad without using the appropriate sex-linked pronoun and the real name of the real person to whom this was really done?
So if you look past the absolute seething on the video currently, he's talking about how Elliot Page apparently fell for some fad, suggesting that people being trans is not real, but rather a fad, because Jordan Peterson lives in an alternate reality and doesn't understand that trans people exist and had for a long fucking time. The definition of a fad is a thing that is here for a period of time and then ends up falling off. If we have knowledge and historical understanding of trans people that have existed even like centuries ago, seems like it's kind of just a thing that humans do and are, maybe. You know, you'd have to use a little bit of logic to figure that out. You'd have to be kind of a smart person, you know, maybe a professor at a college or something in order to understand that, but, you know, not Jordan Peterson.
And so it was impossible to communicate what had happened to my audience without apparently running afoul of the impossible and absurd rules that now hypothetically govern morality itself in the days of the degenerated postmodern and Marxist ethos that we...
Degenerated, you say? So you might have heard me on this stream use the word degenerate when describing a variety of people like Matt Walsh, like Jordan Peterson, etc., etc. The reason why I use this term is because it's used against me and people like me and generally all queer people, and even some non-queer people, depending on their politics, by right-wingers as a method of dehumanizing. But the reason why I use it is a method of reclaiming, because they use it against me all the time, and people like me all the time, so I throw their shit back at them. They've already tossed the shit at me, I'm just throwing it back. But the fact that you bring it up here when talking about trans issues and talking about so-called postmodern neo-Marxism, which harkens back to the cultural Bolshevism, it's just the same shit repackaged in the new term postmodern neo-Marxist. So if you're going to talk about so-called degenerated, I feel like you might want to be a little bit more clear and careful with your rhetoric if you don't want, you know, those kinds of analogies to be drawn by people who understand the history of a lot of these things.
Must still, no matter how impossible it is, abide by, or else.
So how impossible it is. So essentially, Jordan Peterson wanted to say that, oh, the doctor who did Elliot Page's top surgery was a criminal. How am I supposed to deliver the information that I don't think that Elliot Page is a man or whatever? How are these fucking absolute troglodytes in my audience going to be able to understand that a trans man exists, and a trans man might get top surgery to remove their breasts? Maybe have a little bit more faith in your audience, maybe? I mean, you're supposed to be this college professor. You're supposed to be the smart guy. You would imagine that your audience would also be able to learn from you and also grow their knowledge base as a result of that, right? But you have no faith in them. You think they're dumb as fuck because you don't know if they would understand what a trans man is, because you yourself don't understand what it is. Obviously. Is the person who did Jordan Peterson's hair implants or whatever also a criminal? I think so, yes. But that's okay. Perhaps it's just a fad.
And you might object. Ellen/Elliot is an adult, 30-something, and fully capable of making up his, her, their own mind about such things. And she, he, they are welcome.
Like, I feel like you do this joke once, and it's enough. Like, ooh, it's so hard to understand that Elliot Page used to have the name Ellen, but now they use the name Elliot, so that's what we call him now. And Elliot used to use she, her pronouns, but now Elliot uses he, him pronouns, so now we use those. It's not hard, man. This is entry-level shit. This is like Babby's first understanding of people changing their name and their pronouns and how they want to be referred to. Come on. We call a man The Rock. Dwayne The Rock Johnson. We call him The Rock. When we talk about The Rock and his early years before he became Dwayne The Rock Johnson, we still call him The Rock, even though he wasn't then. There's a fucking man named Meatloaf, and we call him Meatloaf in his early years, because he's still Meatloaf. He just wasn't using that name at the time. It's so easy to figure out. It's so easy to figure out.
From the liberal and the libertarian position to go to hell in a handbasket as she, he, they see fit.
Much the same way that it's not easy being green, it's also not easy to get pronouns correctly, especially if you're a college professor that is ostensibly supposed to be very fucking smart, man. Come on.
But I don't believe it is either merely picayune or inappropriate to point out that Ellen/Elliot, who is quite a good actor/actress, is also a ritual...
Like, it's so boring. Like, it's like we're just padding for time. We gotta get past the 10-minute mark, but you got there, so you can drop the fucking word filler. You're getting the ad revenue. Come on.
Ellen/Elliot has undoubtedly, with his, her, their so-called courage, and remember the White House itself has tweeted out every indication of believing in the courage of those who transition, enticed many a poor, confused adolescent, girl most likely, to blame her emergent pubescent self-consciousness, confusion, and discomfort on being born in the wrong body, and believing that the courageous, self-affirming, and morally admirable route is hormonal treatment, sterilization, subjugation to a lifetime of expensive medical complication. How delightfully profitable is that?
Do you have a source for that? Do you have a source for these claims? When does this happen? When does this happen? Is there ever any evidence to suggest that Elliot Page, coming out as trans in his 30s, right? Yeah, 35. In his 30s. Like, where's the evidence that this has produced so many other trans men out there? If you're supposed to be this smart guy, this former college professor, very obviously, you've lost your mind. But what's more interesting than that to me is this idea.
And believing that the courageous, self-affirming, and morally admirable route is hormonal treatment, sterilization, subjugation to a lifetime of expensive medical complication. How delightfully profitable is that? And
that's literally just a conspiracy theory. Where is your evidence that suggests that the only reason trans healthcare exists, which, by the way, is woefully under-researched, woefully underfunded, also woefully inadequate, and also woefully inaccessible, is somehow the reason why trans people exist? Because it's just a scheme in order to extract money from people from, like, the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries. There is no proof for this. There's no evidence for this because it doesn't exist. It is literally just a conspiracy theory. And yes, it's also being outlawed in certain states. It's just a conspiracy theory. There's nothing else here. There's no evidence to back this up whatsoever, which is interesting because there's actually been a history of a lot of conspiracy theories as it pertains to trans people from a variety of anti-trans people out there that are similar to this one. Like a lot of TERFs and so-called gender criticals in the UK suggesting that, oh no, it's Jewish people actually that are the ones that are pushing this trans stuff on people. Not to mention Fox News on June 28, 2022, in the official Fox News Twitter account, posted a link to an article with the caption that says, quote, "Mirror, mirror, the shadowy George Soros-funded group pushed for sweeping gender identity into Title IX documents show." And we've got this sus-ass image of George Soros looming in the background of Joe Biden. Luckily, they say it's a photo illustration. I was worried that, it might have actually been a massive George Soros who has painted his body black and white behind Joe Biden. But, apparently it's a photo illustration, so it's okay. Don't worry. These are literally just, like, not-feed conspiracy theories. Now, you could say that, oh, well, Fox News, they're just reporting on the fact that it is true that a George Soros-funded group has assisted in trying to get gender identity protections into Title IX. But what relevance is it that, one, it's shadowy, two, why would you use a graphic like this, which seems really ominous, it's very sus, and three, how much more evidence do I have to give you that a lot of anti-Semitism has overlap with anti-trans rhetoric? The Institute of Sexuality in Germany, founded by a gay Jewish man, where the first vaginoplasty was performed, where there was a wealth of trans and gender and sex-related research being conducted, was the first place that the Nazis targeted and the books that they burned. The Institute for Sexuality that was founded by a Jewish gay man. Anti-trans rhetoric and anti-trans conspiracy theories as it pertains to Jewish people and their part to play in so-called pushing it on other people is part and parcel with anti-Semitism, with Nazi rhetoric. So I'm just saying, if that's not your intent, if that's not the kind of vibe you're trying to give out when talking about your opposition to trans people, you might, want to be a little more careful with your rhetoric. You might want to be a little more precise with your words. Precise like how a college professor might be with their words. Maybe. This idea that with no evidence, you can just suggest that, ooh, it's just so profitable for the medical industry that trans people require medication and surgical procedures and other procedures like any other person. Just how profitable is that? Are you trying to nationalize the pharmaceutical industry? Are you trying to get single-payer healthcare? Are you trying to nationalize the healthcare industry? Because that's what I'm in favor of, because every comparable OECD nation on the earth has a version of a single-payer healthcare system, and they produce better outcomes for less costs overall, not just cost to the consumer, not just cost to the patient, but cost to the tax revenues of the countries. Are you trying to nationalize it? I don't think you are. I think you've actually fought against that idea. So this idea that, oh, it's such a problem for the fact that the pharmaceutical and medical industry could make money giving medication and procedures and services for trans people might make them money. When, how much money did you pay the person who put those fucking hair plugs on your head and saved your sorry ass hairline? Come on.
And I believe firmly that Ellen slash Elliot,
Elliot,
or whatever the hell name or his name is, bears moral culpability for that.
Moral culpability. Huh. So we're going to allege that the doctor was a criminal, which, you know, in the video, I believe, unless I went past it, at some point in the video, it might be coming up. He says like, oh, well, I shouldn't have said it was criminal because it was legal. I think we'll get into that. So what do you think should be done about Elliot Page doing this horrible crime of existing as a trans person? Jordan Peterson. Exactly. Precisely. What do you think that should be done?
And finally, with regard to the final phrase, criminal physician, I must say that I've had some post-coital, so to speak, regrets about that phrase.
Post-coital. Just jagging it or having sex with your partner while thinking about trans men and the surgical procedures they get and the hormones that they take. Standard normal stuff.
It is clearly
obviously it's a turn of phrase, but come on, what the fuck are we talking about? You could use literally any other phrase there. Like, it's not funny enough outside of the fact that we can clown on his ass for it.
That the surgical operation performed by the butchers who butchered Elliot slash Ellen.
Does post-coital mean post-sex? Coitus is sex. It's like post-coital tristesse, you know, post-nut clarity. It's that. Wait, what? Yeah, exactly. Butchered? Well, that's what they think, right? That's how they talk about any trans surgery. When it comes to, obviously, in the case of Elliot Page and the top surgery, cutting off the breasts, they don't cut off the breasts. It's actually a very careful procedure. To suggest that it's butchering, one, is incorrect because it is a very careful procedure done by medical professionals. And two, it kind of is a disservice to butchers as well because butchers are often fairly careful with the cuts of meat as it pertains to the food that they serve people. Like I've worked around, butchers and whatnot. Like there's certain things you got to do. It might be not as precise as top surgery for a trans man, but it's certainly not what people are suggesting who are anti-trans. It's the same for bottom surgery for trans femme people. And it's like, well, first of all, you're just incorrect because they don't cut off the penis. In order to make the vagina in a vaginoplasty, you need tissue, you need material to do that. It's less of a cutting off of the penis and more of a turning it inside out and remolding it. You know, your penis is just clay, okay? And it's not been fired in the kiln yet. And when they do a vaginoplasty, they remold it into the shape of a vagina. It gets to the point in modern science, which is probably part of why this kind of anti-queer rhetoric is ramping up, which we'll get to in a little bit, pretty indistinguishable from, you know, an AFAB person's vagina. There's actually ways to aid in the self-lubrication of it as well. Actually pretty interesting stuff. Kind of really cool medical science going on there. But, you know, right-wingers are averse to knowledge. They're averse to, you know, anybody with any amount of intelligence, which is why they follow Jordan Peterson, because, like I say, he's the stupid person's idea of what a smart person is.
The surgical operation performed by the butchers who butchered Elliot slash Ellen was legal. So, was it criminal or not? Were the operations undertaken by the fascist physicians who carried out the Nazi medical experiments legal?
I don't know about saying shit earlier that kind of alludes to very commonly held anti-Semitic and Nazi talking points and conspiracies as it pertains to trans people. I don't know about bringing up the Nazi doctors who did all manner of heinous shit, Jordan Peterson. I feel like that wasn't a smart play. Like, if you understand the history, which obviously Jordan Peterson doesn't or doesn't care about, bringing that up only makes you more sus, Jordan Peterson. What the fuck are you doing? Why would you say this? Like, you're insane. You've lost the plot. The apple cider, it's gotten to your little brain. How can you start with, ooh, it's so profitable for the medical industry? Ooh, wonder if there's a perverse incentive for people to be coerced into being trans by public figures. That kind of fucking conspiracy bullshit with no evidence. And then talk about Nazi doctors, the Nazis, like I said, who literally targeted the Institute for Sexuality, where the first vaginoplasty happened, where all manner of gender, science, and research was conducted and held. The first books they burned were there. The place was ransacked, and it was founded by a gay Jewish man. Like, you're more sus, man. You're making the case worse for yourself. But like I say, I am not alleging that Jordan Peterson himself is an anti-Semitic person or a Nazi, okay? But what I am suggesting is that he is certainly signaling, whether wittingly or unwittingly, to people that are interested in that idea. And that's just blatantly irresponsible if that's not your intent. So I would invite you, Jordan Peterson, to learn about the history of the Nazis as it pertains to trans people, educate yourself, as I know you were at one point, I'm sure, capable of being able to become a college professor to begin with, and maybe retract some of your previous statements that I have talked about here. Because otherwise, this shit's fucked up.
Yes, under the laws of the time. But were they criminal? I'll leave that question up to you to answer.
So yes. So he thinks it's criminal. So he does actually think that the doctors who did the top surgery for Elliot Page are criminals and should be held to account by the justice system. By saying, I'll leave that up to you to answer. In this fucking badass way. Like, you've already said your opinion. You do think it's criminal. You think it should be criminal. And it may well become criminal if people like Ron DeSantis continue on their crusade against queer people. If people like Greg Abbott continue on their crusade against queer people. If people like the entire Republican Party and the entire right-wing sphere continue with their rhetoric and their oppression of queer people. So I alluded to the fact that the Highland Park area has a large number of Jewish people. It's a very large population of Jewish people there. There are multiple synagogues as well. So Elad Neorai, my apologies, tweets, quote, Jews have done all the heavy lifting to get out that Highland Park may have been targeted for its Jewish population. We were also the only ones to report that the shooter visited a synagogue months earlier to scope it out. Pretty hard to not feel like we're on our own. Well, thank God, me, a non-Jewish person here, is also talking about it. Nobody on YouTube, thank God. So they reference this article in forward.com from Louis Keene, security director. Suspect in July 4th Highland Park shooting was, quote, sizing up synagogue. Suspect visited Chabad Synagogue during Passover, according to volunteer. So this is the Central Avenue Synagogue, which is Highland Park's Chabad Center. The suspect in the deadly 4th of July mass shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, paid an alarming visit to the city's Chabad Synagogue during Passover, said the congregation's volunteer security director. Quote, he was definitely sizing up the synagogue, Martin Blumenthal said Tuesday in an interview. So that's the security director, as far as I'm aware. The shooter, whom police apprehended Monday evening and have described as both a, quote, suspect and, quote, person of interest, and has had charges pressed against him, as we read earlier, in the shooting, showed up at Central Avenue Synagogue on the last day of Passover this year. He stood out from the typical Shabbat visitor. Shooter was wearing all black clothes, quote, in the goth style, according to Blumenthal, including black gloves. After sitting in the sanctuary for about 45 minutes, the shooter, who was 21, left by bike, according to Blumenthal. The Times of Israel today reported that the synagogue's rabbi, Yosef Shanowitz, also said that the shooter had visited a synagogue during Passover. Authorities have not yet attributed a motive to the shooting that killed 7 and injured dozens at the 4th of July parade. Highland Park has a significant Jewish population and is home to several other synagogues and Jewish institutions. At least 3 of the 7 people killed in the shooting, 6 had been publicly identified by authorities as of Tuesday afternoon, are Jewish. Those close to the incident said there may be other Jewish victims among the dead. Though Blumenthal believed the shooter was scoping out the synagogue, which he estimated had 125 people there that day, he did not check the man's ID or report the incident to police, unfortunately, in this case. But I mean, who could have known that this would occur? He said, to the best of his knowledge, the shooter had not broken any laws by coming to the synagogue and that he had felt he had handled the situation appropriately. Quote, I profiled him. I knew what he was up to, said Blumenthal, but he didn't cause a disturbance or anything, so I was just watching him. The synagogue, which sits on Monday's 4th of July parade route, Central Avenue, just a few blocks from the site of Monday's carnage, hires an armed off-duty police officer to protect the congregation on Shabbat and holidays, Shanowitz said in an interview. He also said there were armed people in the synagogue with a license to carry. Blumenthal declined to say whether he was armed when the shooter visited. Blumenthal, who had been attending Central Avenue Synagogue since he came to town in 1985, was one of countless Highland Park residents who knew someone affected by the shooting. He said the sister of a childhood friend had a graze wound, and her niece was in the hospital with a wounded leg. In spite of the Passover incident, which Blumenthal said he reported to authorities as soon as he saw the shooter's picture on the news, he did not want to speculate on the motive of the shooter. So a 2019 mass shooting at Shabbat of Poway, a synagogue near San Diego, which killed a congregant and injured 3 others, also occurred on the last day of Passover. So we don't know yet that there's any motive as it pertains to the Highland Park shooter, and I'm not here to ascribe any motive. I am simply bringing this up because the history of the person, should more details come to light, being further to the right politically, being active at Trump rallies, the fact that this area, which is close to where the shooter lived, has a big Jewish population is certainly noteworthy as a potential method for understanding more about the story. But we can't, with any authority, as suggested in the article as well, ascribe any motive at all, and that's not what I'm here to do. I just found it relevant given everything I've talked about as it pertains to anti-Semitism thus far. So, as we can tell, it seems to be the case that right-wingers can never give us any actual substantive steps to take in order to decrease the likelihood of mass shootings happening. They oppose all of the policies that people have put forward that studies have shown have been effective. and could be effective in the United States, like red flag laws, like looking for histories of domestic violence, which seems to be a pretty big indicator, like wait times for gun purchases so that when people purchase a gun, they have to wait several days to a week before they can actually receive it, so that they have time to think about, is this the thing I should do with this gun? Maybe I shouldn't. Or maybe there are people that might find out that they have plans to do this before they receive the weapon, and then they can either get them the help they need or report them to the authorities, whatever it is. It decreases the likelihood, ideally, of these things happening. Any amount of, these things they completely oppose because Republicans hate you and want you to suffer. That's just a fact of life. They seem to not really care, and the only prescriptions they do have is so-called addressing mental illness, even though they consistently oppose measures that would increase the accessibility that people have to mental health services, much less physical standard health services. They also talk about, weed is apparently a big problem now. Doors are an issue, even though the Highland Park shooting occurred in an open-air parade. They talk about good guys with a gun, even though the Highland Park parade had armed police officers all over the place. So the good guys with the guns apparently did not seem to work either. Thoughts and prayers. They don't really seem to care about mass shootings happening. They don't really seem to take mass shootings as an issue seriously, even though the United States is the only country of any that are comparable that have this issue occur all the time. And it makes you wonder, right? It makes you wonder, why is it that they don't seem to take it seriously? Surely it could be that the NRA funds a lot of politicians that oppose those legislation because the NRA wants as many people to be able to buy guns as possible so they can get as much money as they can. And they also know that it is a culture war talking point on the backs of countless lost lives that can get them votes from their base. But it also seems to be the case that one of the unfortunate consequences of the fact that mass shootings are happening all the goddamn time in this country is shit like this. So Connor Hansen of Fox 35 tweets, hundreds of people at a fireworks show at Lake Eola suddenly start to flee down the street. Police rushing the other way, it's unclear what has happened. So it seems to be the case, as Alejandro Caraballo talks about, the price of rampant mass shootings is that no one ever feels safe in public. This is destroying the social fabric of our country. Some firecrackers went off in the crowd in Florida, and people reacted reasonably given what has happened in Highland Park, Uvalde, Buffalo, etc. And, that makes a lot of sense. If you've seen footage of the Highland Park shooting, there were people who, after the shooting started, they weren't aware if it was actually gunfire or if it was fireworks. Some people didn't react at all because they thought it might have just been fireworks. So now here we see the inverse, where people didn't know if it was gunfire or if it was fireworks because they live in the only country where this regularly happens. It is a completely reasonable response to be afraid in this situation, considering the same day the Highland Park shooting happened at a July 4th parade. That's just the state of our country. And it seems to be, in some ways, beneficial to those that wouldn't want people to be able to get together in large gatherings, like, say, a protest or a large community event or a celebration of any kind of heritage as it pertains to race, ethnicity, sexuality, like pride parades, etc. People that don't like the idea of those things happening, well, if people are more and more scared of the fact that a mass shooting might happen at the big public event that they're going to, they might stay home. They might be less likely to go to these things. And it makes us more and more disconnected from each other as people, a social animal, the human species, more and more disconnected from each other and less likely to get together in times that are supposed to be of celebration, that are supposed to be some of the most memorable moments of people's lives. There's a very good thread that Heidi Lee Feldman, a law professor, certainly probably one smarter than Jordan Peterson, put out on Twitter. It says, quote, "There is a direct connection between destroying opportunities for safe public gatherings and menacing American democracy," which makes a lot of sense if you think about it for any amount of time. "In a pluralist democracy, it is vital for the people of varied backgrounds to be able to use and enjoy public spaces together. Gathering for parades, for entertainment, for education, etc. builds a sense of civilized society that allows for a diversity of religion, race, gender, and creed." This is very true. A big thing that you'll notice in large urban centers with big populations is that those people tend to have a diverse range of people from all walks of life, of different race, ethnicity, religion, gender identity, sexuality. And being able to see those people in real life, just living their lives like anybody else, that exposure to people that are different from you makes you less likely to have bigoted views from them. This is why major city centers seem to lean more liberal, seem to be more left-wing, because you kind of have to be. You can't have that amount of, social discord between people of varying different backgrounds and the bigotry that inspires and have a functional city. Because human beings are social animals, we need to work together to be able to prosper. This is how we got to the point in our history that we're at right now that right-wingers are trying as hard as they can to undo. The alienation that people feel from not being able to go to these public gatherings, and in a variety of other ways, which we'll talk about shortly, makes people less likely to be exposed to those kinds of people, have those kinds of positive experiences with people whose backgrounds they don't share, and come to see those people as just normal human beings, which promotes solidarity between everybody, as people just trying to be productive and helpful members of society. Because contrary to popular belief, human beings like helping each other, because they also like it when those human beings do that for them too. It makes people feel good. It gives them a purpose for their life. Some right-wingers might try to tell you that that's not true, like Scott Adams, who says that, there's no hope, and to deal with the young man problem, quote-unquote, you have to, apparently, as he suggests, either watch people die or kill your own son. Don't listen to that guy for advice. That's for sure. Anyway. Our public spaces and accommodations, street shopping areas, sports venues, schools, parks, buses, etc. are where we ordinarily come together, interacting in small ways with people unlike ourselves, learning how to share civic life. We ordinarily can learn that we can be together happily both despite and because of our differences. Gun violence in this country interferes with this, and this is why anti-democracy institutions and people actively want more guns available to more people. This can be a contributing factor. The idea that it becomes more difficult to go in these big public spaces and have these experiences because you're worried that you might lose your life from a mass shooting makes it harder for that to happen. Makes it harder for people to stand in solidarity and protest. By making it dangerous for people of diverse backgrounds to gather in public, gunmongers promote fear and suspicion of one another. So like that Supreme Court ruling that made it so that, contrary to states' rights, which is apparently very important to this current Supreme Court, you cannot have laws in your particular state as it pertains to people getting a concealed carry license because they should just be able to get one. This is not to suggest that everybody suddenly in New York, as was the context for that case, is now going to be concealed carrying, but now you don't really know. Now you don't have a solid understanding that because of these gun control, these gun regulation measures, the proliferation of guns to people who shouldn't be having them, who might be more likely to do these violent acts, you don't have a solid understanding that that's the case anymore. So now it does promote that fear and suspicion of other people. Is that person concealed carrying? I used to have a good idea of that because you couldn't. It was very difficult to where I was, but now it's going to be a lot easier, so I don't actually know. It's not helpful. By making public space so vulnerable to deadly violence, those who promote and push guns strike at the civil fabric. We must insist on a return to a livable interpretation of the Second Amendment, which would suggest that, from myself, and also Heidi here, we don't want to abolish it. We just need to interpret it in such a way that doesn't allow for this country to be the only one that regularly loses its citizens and non-citizens to gun violence and mass shootings. There are ways to fix this, and you can tailor those studied ways to fix it to the context of the United States while retaining people's ability to responsibly own firearms and while making it so that mass shootings happen less. But right-wingers don't want this. It makes you wonder why they oppose all the legislation that would be at least trying to do something about it. More civil accountability for the gun industry, not out of dislike of arms, but out of a love for American pluralist democracy. And it is important to note at the very beginning that there is a direct connection between destroying opportunities for safe public gatherings and menacing democracy in America, because as we'll talk about when it comes to the current makeup of the Supreme Court, they're actually going after democracy as it exists currently. But we'll get into that in just another moment. To stay on the anti-trans and anti-queer angle of things really briefly, there has been a bill signed in Florida which would require, apparently, Florida students and professors to tell the state their political views, which ostensibly is supposed to be about promoting ideological diversity, but I wonder which, views they're going to target when it comes to any kind of punitive action that might happen as a result of the state having this information. So unfortunately, we don't yet know exactly how because of the vaguity of the bill, because of like previous Florida bills that have been incredibly vague so that the interpretation of them is hard to determine, like the Don't Say Gay bill, which we saw in the most recent video we put out about Ron DeSantis and Joe Rogan. People are being instructed out of an abundance of caution to take down pictures of their same-sex partners and have to forcibly out students if they are trans to their parents and whatnot. Much the same way, we don't yet know what the state is going to do with the ideological predilections of these people. The idea that the state should have any kind of file on the ideological predilections of people is kind of insane and can be abused for negative outcomes, especially in an increasingly authoritarian America and an increasingly authoritarian Florida under Ron DeSantis, one of the most anti-freedom politicians we currently have in this country. But of course, Joe Rogan thinks he's for freedom or whatever. And apparently, DeSantis and his administration have suggested that potentially taxpayer dollars could be withheld from states by saying, quote, that's not worth tax dollars and that's not something that we're going to be supporting moving forward. This so-called left-wing ideology having a massive bias in universities, which is a very common trope. The actual reason for that is that, one, colleges usually have a diversity of people there, so because of exposure, you are likely to become less bigoted, as we suggested before, and also, generally speaking, the more educated you become, the less likely you are to fall for the propaganda and indoctrination that right-wingers are trying to push to you to make you mad at the other and punch down at people that don't look like you in order to control you and get you to vote against their best interests so that they can cut taxes for the wealthy, deregulate corporations, and make them more wealthy, etc., etc., etc. But, that's old news by this point. Also, Aaron Reed puts out, shameful, the Leon County School Board in Florida passed a policy to notify parents if a transgender student is, quote, open about their gender identity and using the bathrooms/locker rooms. Openly transgender students will be singled out and documented for other parents. And there have been similar things happening as it pertains to parents having to be notified if an LGBTQ student exists in school. If a parent has a student in that school, then they are to be notified that that kid exists, which singles out these kids for all manner of bigotry and oppression. It's almost like they want to force queer people back into the closet and make them cease to exist. Get them out of the public eye. The reasons for this, you could imagine. Recent Gallup polling data on LGBT plus identification by generation. So from 2012 to 2021, Gen Z at 20.8% identify as some manner of LGBTQ. Millennials are at 10.5% and so on and so forth. There was that article that came out that we talked about in videos in the past, where I believe it was 1 in 5 Gen Z adults identify as LGBT. This is why. Because queer people are being understood as just human beings like everybody else, not hurting anybody, and aren't being as oppressed as they had been in the past, and are able to be more visible as a result of that, the right wing has to react to that in a negative way, and that's why you get all of the anti-trans rhetoric. That's why you get all of the anti-queer rhetoric. That's why you get people like Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, people like Christina Pushaw, the press secretary that we talked about in the most recent video, citing libs of TikTok as opening her eyes, quote unquote, about the fact that LGBTQ people exist, and some of them go to school and or are teachers, just like anybody else. This is why this is all happening. Because one, the project has always been to oppress queer people by any means necessary. Back in the day, if you were out as queer, you were literally just killed, or you were subjugated and forced into the closet. As time passed, queer people became a little bit more open, but they were still subject to all manner of violence. They were still subject to all manner of oppression, housing discrimination, job discrimination. More and more as time goes on, Obergefell, 2015, legalizes gay marriage. That was a major moment in the LGBTQ community because it helped the broader public understand that gay people are just people like everybody else. They're trying to marry the people they love like anybody else, and they should have a right to do that. And unfortunately, because right-wingers understand that getting their base, who is easily triggered, upset about queer people, specifically in the case of the modern context, trans people, because they understand that it is politically effective to weaponize the humanity of those people for votes, they're gonna do that. And as we know about when it comes to the Roe v. Wade overturn, Justice Clarence Thomas has said that the court should reassess or review or whatever Obergefell, which legalized gay marriage, and I always forget the name of the one that made laws against sodomy illegal, that one as well. But they're not stopping there. Because of the Federalist Society's success in filling courts at every level, and state legislatures, mind you, for the right-wing project in general, with right-wingers at every level, and the activist judges in the Supreme Court, which Trump was able to appoint, who now have a majority, are literally just operating as high priests, delivering royal decrees to the people about undoing multiple decades-long precedent because of their ideological predilections and not because of any actual reasonable interpretation of the Constitution, as is actually their job. They're supposed to be apolitical, even though they're literally fucking appointed by presidents who win elections through politics. It's literally impossible for a Supreme Court to be apolitical. Sorry to burst your bubble. Much the same way it's completely illegitimate by this point and should be unpacked. It's already been packed. You need to unpack it by nominating 4 more people and getting it to 1 justice per circuit court, 13. But Democrats are completely fucking feckless in the face of this. Tom Hartman put out a recent article about the Supreme Court's upcoming decision on the Moore v. Harper case, which at its most basic addresses the independent state legislator doctrine, which essentially could lead to, in the future, should a state controlled by right-wingers go to, let's say, Biden if he runs again in 2024, well, under the independent state legislator doctrine, they could literally just usurp the will of the people and decide to give all of their electoral votes to Trump if he runs again, let's say. But we'll get into that in this. Essentially completely undoing our democracy in a judicial coup. It is being planned out in the open. They are doing it out in the open, and the Democrats are not doing enough to stop it. When we talk about how there is a direct connection between destroying opportunities for safe public gatherings and menacing American democracy, this is what we're talking about. 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court just announced a story that has largely flown under the nation's political radar somehow, because probably it's less exciting than Roe v. Wade. Both are important, but, I mean, you can't really have Roe v. Wade if we don't have a democracy, so this one seems to be of at least equal, if not more important, that they'll consider pre-rigging the presidential election of 2024. Here's one aspect of how it could work out if they go along with the GOP's arguments that will be before the court this October. So this is going to be a brief, scenario to try to give you more of a visual of how this could work. It's November 2024, and the presidential race between Biden and DeSantis has been tabulated by the states and called by the networks. Biden won 84 million plus votes to DeSantis' 77 million, clearly carrying the popular vote. As is usually the case, the judges on the Supreme Court that are conservative, the majority of them have been elected by presidents who have not won the popular vote, but have instead won the Electoral College, which unfortunately is what decides the president, and not the will of the people, which was literally just implemented to appease slaveholders, but whatever. Surely there's no such thing as systemic racism and white supremacy. But the popular vote isn't enough. George W. Bush lost to Al Gore by 500,000 votes, and Donald Trump lost to Hillary Clinton by 3 million votes, but both ended up in the White House. What matters is the Electoral College vote, and that looks good for Biden too. As CNN is reporting, the outcome is a virtual clone of the 2020 election. Biden carries the same states he did that year, and DeSantis gets all the Trump states. It's 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, a 74 Electoral College lead for Biden, at least as calculated by CNN and the rest of the media. Biden is heading to the White House for another 4 years, until the announcement comes out of Georgia. Although Biden won the popular vote in Georgia, their legislature decided it can overrule the popular vote and just awarded the state's 16 electoral votes to DeSantis instead of Biden. An hour later, we hear from 5 other states with Republican-controlled legislatures where Biden won the majority of the vote, just like he had in 2020. North Carolina, 15 electoral votes, Wisconsin, 10, Michigan, 16, Pennsylvania, 20, and Arizona, 11. Each has followed Georgia's lead, and their legislators have awarded their electoral college votes, even though Biden won the popular vote in each state, to DeSantis. Thus, a total of 88 electoral college votes from those 6 states move from Biden to DeSantis, who's declared the winner and will be sworn in January 2025, which is not out of pocket to suggest. This is what Trump wanted in the 2020 election, but there were rules in place that disallowed state legislatures from doing this. That's what they're currently about to rule on. Essentially, right-wingers, Republicans, understand that their ideology, their party, is not popular. They are a minority party. The only reason that they've had any amounts of power in the modern context is because of the Electoral College. Because even though they lose the popular vote, they still win the Electoral College because they've gerrymandered the fucking hell and employed all manner of voter suppression out of the states that they control, which is already anti-democratic. Not to mention that the Supreme Court is also an anti-democratic institution. It is an undemocratic institution. The people do not elect the Supreme Court justices. They elect the president that appoints them, but if it is the case that the will of the people doesn't matter when it comes to electing the president, as it doesn't with the Electoral College, then what the fuck does it mean that the Supreme Court has been nominated by the president who's been elected by the people? So we go on a little bit. Sound far-fetched? 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court just announced that one of the first cases they'll decide next year, after their brief, summer recess. Because the work of Supreme Court justices is so hard. You have a lifetime appointment. It's incredibly difficult to get you out of that seat. You're pretty cozy. You got a good salary. You got to take a break at some point from that really difficult job. Could include whether that very scenario is constitutional or not. At least 5 of the Republicans on the court will almost certainly say that it is. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution lays out the process clearly, and it doesn't even mention once the popular vote or the will of the people. Quote, each state shall appoint, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons, which lists they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the blah, 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 blah. Essentially, it doesn't outright say that the will of the people is important in this process, but allows for some wiggle room to be interpreted in whatever way the Supreme Court decides. So previously, the Supreme Court understood that allowing for state legislatures to just usurp the will of the people and give their electoral votes to the person who didn't win the popular vote was an anti-democratic idea and shouldn't happen. So protections were put in place to make it so that it didn't. So Donald Trump's attempted coup didn't happen, even though he wanted Governor Kemp in Georgia to do this. Now, next time around, if this decision goes through, he might have a better case to be made. It's not particularly ambiguous, even as clarified by the 12th Amendment and the Electoral Count Act of 1887. Neither mentions the will of the people, although the Electoral Count Act requires each state's governor to certify the vote before passing it along to Washington, D.C., and half of those states have Democratic governors. Which brings us to the Supreme Court's probable 2023 decision. As Robert Barnes wrote yesterday for the Washington Post, quote, the Supreme Court on Thursday said it would consider what would be a radical change in the way federal elections are conducted, giving state legislatures sole authority to set the rules for contests even if their actions violated state constitutions and resulted in extreme partisan gerrymandering for congressional seats. While the main issue being debated in Moore v. Harper, scheduled for a hearing this October, is a gerrymander that conflicts with North Carolina's constitution, and the issue at the core of the debate is what's called the, quote, independent state legislature doctrine. It literally gives state legislatures the power to pre-rig or simply hand elections to the candidate of their choice. So any enjoyers of democracy, any enjoyers of not living under an authoritarian regime, any enjoyers of the so-called American experiment that is ostensibly supposed to be centering the will of the people and moving away from authoritarian monarchist rule. It was almost like there was an entire war. I think they called it the Revolutionary War, to that effect. As NPR notes, quote, the independent state legislature theory was first invoked by 3 conservative U.S. Supreme Court justices in the celebrated Bush v. Gore case that handed the 2000 election victory to George W. Bush. In that case, the 3 cited it to support the selection of a Republican slate of presidential electors. There is precedent for this so-called doctrine to overturn elections already. It is not far-fetched to suggest that if the current Supreme Court decides in the way that they're slated to, Bush v. Gore could happen again. Those 3 were Rehnquist, Scalia, and Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas being the only one still there. The other ones, rest in piss, you won't be missed. They wrote in their concurring opinion in Bush v. Gore, quote, the federal questions that ultimately emerge in this case are not substantial. Article 2 provides that, quote, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. Continuing the quote, but as we indicated in our remand of the earlier case, in a presidential election that clearly expressed intent of the legislature must prevail. So Clarence Thomas, whose wife, Ginny Thomas, has been implicated, allegedly, in the January 6th attempted coup, attempted overthrow of our democracy. Clarence Thomas, who did not recuse himself from cases pertaining to that. His wife, who wasn't a big fan of democracy. Turns out Clarence Thomas, also not a big fan of democracy. Turns out Clarence Thomas, pretty big fan of being a activist, conservative Supreme Court justice in the position that he's in right now, finally having the majority to be able to act as a fucking high council and order decrees like monarchists to the people and leave it up to states to decide, say, if somebody can get an abortion or not. And you could say, well, if it leaves it up to states' rights, then, surely it's just making it more democratic. No, you stupid fucking idiot. If these states, these Republican states, which they objectively definitely are gerrymandered to hell, which is inherently undemocratic and draws districts in ways that makes it almost a shoo-in that Republicans win and reduces all competition, and if they employ all manner of voter suppression tactics to make it so that less and less people vote, well, as it turns out, historically, the lower the voter turnout is, the more likely Republicans are to win. The higher voter turnout is, the more likely Democrats are to win. Historically, factually speaking. So if those states do not have actual democratic processes, then you cannot talk about states' rights. States' rights don't mean shit without a actual working democratic process. Miss me with this fucking, it's just expanding democracy bullshit. We see past your fucking garbage. That doctrine, the basis of John Eastman and Donald Trump's effort to get states to submit multiple slates of electors, asserts that a plain reading of Article 2 in the 12th Amendment of the Constitution says that each state's legislature has final say in which candidate gets their state's electoral college vote, governors, and the will of the voters be damned. Fully 21 years before Trump tried the same trick, David Barstow and Samini Sengupta wrote for the New York Times on November 28, 2000, that Jeb and George W. Bush were discussing it, quote, the president of Florida's Senate said today that Governor Jeb Bush had indicated his willingness to sign special legislation intended to award Florida's 25 electoral college votes to his brother, Governor George W. Bush of Texas, even as the election results were being contested. Surely there's no conflict of interest between the fact that they're fucking family Barstow and Sengupta added 22 years ago, quote, talk of the special legislative session continued unabated here today as local Republicans fretted about the possibility that justices on the Florida Supreme Court, all appointed by Democrats, might uphold the challenge by Vice President Al Gore for a statewide recount, ultimately awarding him the state's electoral votes. Which is also not to mention the Brooks Brothers riots, because, right-wingers, they condemn the violence of January 6th. They don't like the rioting of BLM and Antifa. The Brooks Brothers riots were literally instrumental in making it so that George Bush was actually able to, through a undoing of democracy, be awarded the electoral votes from Florida and win the election. As I wrote 8 months ago, says Tom Hartman before the 2020 election, predicting that Trump would do what Bush considered trying 20 years earlier, quote, thus through simple brute force, if Trump, Fox News, and Limbaugh et al. Were to loudly claim that there was, quote, voter fraud in any or all of these states and succeed in casting doubts about the integrity of an election that would put a Democrat in the White House, the manufactured conflict could be resolved in the House and the election given to Trump by one or more state legislatures as Florida threatened to do in 2000. This has been a long time coming, and this is true. They have been plotting this out in the open for a long time. The fact that the Democrats don't have a good response to this right now, much less had a good response to the overturn of Roe v. Wade, which we also knew about and had been planned for perhaps just as long, if not longer, is ludicrous. The fact that Democrats are seemingly absent in all of this, while there is currently a scheme that has been plotted for decades to make it so that they can never win elections again, is fucking insane. Which is why leftists all the time talk about liberals not being equipped to fight fascism. They're just not. It's incredibly apparent given the modern context. They have placed too much importance on proceduralism, on civility, on decorum, to do anything that would be seen as out of pocket by the right wing lest they be called authoritarians, even though they literally always are. They called Obama a communist, socialist, neo-Marxist, authoritarian. They call fucking Joe Biden authoritarian communist. They're gonna call you authoritarian no matter what you do, so you might as well do shit that continues the project of American democracy as diminished as it currently is. What the fuck? Like, I don't know how much more I can say. The Republicans point out that the Constitution says that it's up to the states, quote, in such a manner to decide which presidential candidate gets the Electoral College votes. But the Electoral Count Act requires the governor's sign-off, and half those states have Democratic governors, which has precedence the Constitution or the Act. If the Supreme Court says it's the U.S. Constitution rather than the Electoral Count Act, states' constitutions, state laws, or the votes of their citizens, the scenario outlined above becomes not just possible, but very likely. Republicans answering to their right-wing billionaire donors rather than voters play hardball and consistently push to the extremes regardless of public opinion. After all, the Constitution only mentions the state's legislatures, which are all Republican-controlled, so the unwillingness of the Democratic governors of Michigan, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania to sign off on the Electoral College votes becomes moot. Under this circumstance, DeSantis becomes president, the third Republican president in the 21st century, and also the third Republican president to have lost the popular vote election yet ended up in the White House. The scenario isn't just plausible, it is probable. GOP-controlled states are already changing their state laws to allow for it, and Republican strategists are gaming out which states have Republican legislatures willing to override the votes of their people to win the White House for the Republican candidate. It is a judicial coup. If you look at coups in other countries, there's a variety of ways they happen. Sometimes the military, through violence, usurps the throne, as it were, of the administration in power and installs their own. Sometimes the people rise up and overthrow the monarchy, as it happened in the Revolutionary War that founded this country, usurp the power of the monarchy, and then do a coup in that way. Also, it is possible that you, through the judicial system, which is one of the three branches of our government, control courts at all levels because they can act outside of the grasp of the other two, executive branch and Congress, out of their grasp to rein them in. Now, it is the case that there are checks and balances that make it difficult for that to happen, but luckily, through the Federalist Project, they don't really have to worry about that as much, and because Democrats are seemingly absent about this issue, they don't have to worry about much. Democrats have already fucking snatched defeat from the jaws of victory when it comes to Roe v. Wade, which is an incredibly popular decision that a bipartisan consensus don't want overturned. They haven't been able to effectively message on that. What the fuck makes you think they're going to be able to effectively measure on a very fucking convoluted, particular process as it pertains to the independent state legislatures of these governments and how that could potentially undo our democracy? If they can't effectively message on Roe v. Wade, they can't effectively message on this either. They are useless. Now, it is the case that, unfortunately, because of the first past the post, until we get past the first past the post and get to a proportional voting system like ranked choice voting or any other system, you have to vote for the Democrats as the least bad option, because it is always better to have a Democrat in office rather than Republicans. That's just factual. So you have to try to get these Democrats to do a goddamn anything about it, and it's difficult. But this is the play. It is out in the open. Republicans understand that they are unpopular. They understand that if we were in a popular vote system, they would not win anymore. They understand that the lower voter turnout is, the more likely they are to win. That's why they gerrymander. That's why they do voter suppression. They understand that the only way they can maintain power is through this judicial coup or other means, but this is the one that they seem to be going with, which they seem to have a high probability of succeeding with, in order to attain minority control over the country and oppress the majority, and essentially form an autocratic authoritarian regime. It can happen here. Fascism is not an insane thing that just, happened once in Germany and that was it. Fascism happens a lot. Authoritarian regimes happen a lot. And it can happen here. It is literally happening. Republicans understand that they can only rule if they undo this, and because, contrary to Democrats, Republicans only want power, and historically fascists only weaponize democracy so long as it is beneficial, and as soon as it's not beneficial, they throw it away, like they're doing right now. Because they only want power, they understand that this is how they're going to get it, so that's what they're doing. Because Democrats have some fucking absurd concept of, ooh, there's a reasonable Republican Party. And Joe Biden has all this flowery rhetoric to talk about the Republic. No, they are anti-American. They are anti-democracy. They want to control you outside of the will of the people. They hate you and want you to suffer. They only want power. They understand that they can no longer contend with democracy because they will no longer win. So they are trying to get power by any means necessary. And once they get it, they're not going to fucking let go easily. You have to stop them before they get to that point, because undoing that shit after it happens is infinitely harder than stopping it from happening. So, as it pertains to the activist Supreme Court, and Clarence Thomas specifically, who has a lot of grounds to be impeached, this tweet went viral. Rosa Parks actually had some choice words to say about Justice Clarence Thomas. Quote, his confirmation to the highest court in the land would not represent a step forward in the road to racial progress, but a U-turn on that road. His statements on Broward versus the Board of Education, and even on the Roe v. Wade, to me, indicate that he wants to push the clock back. The Supreme Court now appears to be turning its back on the undeniable fact of discrimination and exclusion. I believe that Judge Thomas will accelerate that trend, and that will be destructive for our nation. And what a fucking Nostradamus Rosa Parks is. If you're not going to take the words of a no-name YouTuber, Twitch streamer on the internet, surely you can take the fucking words of Rosa motherfucking Parks. But to end on a positive note, as positive as we could possibly get in this moment, I wanted to look at what was suggested in this tweet specifically as it pertains to the Highland Park shooter. So this is from Dirty South Right Watch, which is apparently a news collective covering politics and extremism in the South. They say, while much has been made of the Highland Park shooter's attendance of Trump rallies, more alarming is his presence in online subcultures detached from reality. Alienated, some may say. The shooter inhabited communities focused on conspiracy theories, shocker, the paranormal, and deep nihilism. These communities cut off their participants from consensus reality at large and serve to lower the inhibitions of their participants towards violence. The shooter's obsession with violence, school shootings, conspiracies, and Trumpism as a way to destabilize the system / create chaos echoes similar interests within the incel-core music community, which the shooter was not a member of. However, the online communities the shooter inhabited exist in close connection to the incel-core online community. Quote-unquote schizo posting and 4chan brain rot abound in these communities and serve as important radicalization points for youth today. Unfortunately, the establishment is unprepared to examine situations such as these with nuance and to make sense of the online communities and subcultures that more and more mass shooters emerge from. One final thought, are these spaces often incredibly racist? Yes. Much of the online presence, jokes, irony, etc. is incredibly obfuscating of what is actually believed. That's the point. Obfuscate belief until nothing is clear, reality seems out of reach, and undertaking a mass shooting is akin to one final massive post. Also, it gives them plausible deniability. Oh, they're just joking. Oh, of course, everybody you don't like is a Nazi, right? Their actual views are so absurd, and the things they say are so absurd that when you call it out, you look like you're overreacting. You look like you're being bad faith. You look like you're exaggerating. This is a common fascist tactic. So, what's interesting to me is that a lot of people are talking about the Highland Park shooter's disconnection from reality, his alienation from the world around him. And I wanted to look at some of the potential reasons for that. So you could talk about his attendance at Trump rallies, you could talk about his presence in the online subcultures as mentioned here, but I think it's also important to look at where he lived. So apparently he is from a place called Highwood, Illinois. We've got the Google Maps here of that. You'll notice that Highland Park is not very far away. And if you look at it, there really isn't shit going on here, if I'm honest with you. If you look at all this, you got all these suburbs with nothing going on. You can walk, though it's a pretty long walk, but if you live here, especially if you live all the way down here, Jesus Christ, you can walk to the middle part of the city here, where there is this commercial district where literally anything is going to happen. There are also some empty fields and some park space available. And this can't be said for a lot of places, but there's actually commuter rail going through the place because it's Illinois, the Rust Belt. There is not a lot of good public transit in the United States. The fact that there's commuter rail here at all is exceptional in the broader context, which is unfortunate. So if you look at it, let's say we're down here in the middle of suburbia. If we live here, what is there to do? Like, you're going to have to either have a car and walk around, or you can walk and maybe there's a law office you can visit. Woohoo! There's a landscaping and pavers of Highland Park. That's neat. Amidai Produce, which is interesting. There's a construction place, but there isn't a whole lot of shit you can actually do as a young man, as a young person in American suburbia. The fact that the suburbs are, by design, disconnected and almost exclusively zoned for residential means that you have to have a car to get to where anything is happening, which is often the areas that are zoned for commercial, where all of these shops, restaurants, event centers, etc. are going to be. Because of that, if you don't want to make this walk, if you don't want to make this bike ride, if the public transit here isn't that great, which it seems to be better than, most American suburbs, because, there's a rail line here because it's an older place, you're not really doing a whole lot. Like, what is there to do? You got nothing until you have access to a car. So you're just going to fester. Hopefully you have friends around you can hang out with. Or you're going to stay in your fucking room all day, playing video games, watching YouTube videos, going online, reading message boards, and potentially getting radicalized to the far right in the process. And you'll be fed all manner of fucking information about how the world is against you, everything is fucked, the world has no meaning, and that can create the conditions that lead to people engaging in self-harm, being depressed, feeling like life is pointless and hopeless, because if you live in the middle of fucking suburbia, there is literally nothing to do, so it seems pretty fucking bleak to me. This is a big problem. The saying goes, the closer you are physically, the closer you are socially. The idea that this is the place that the shooter lived at, it isn't shocking to me that he felt alienated from the world around him. It isn't shocking to me that he felt alone and isolated and antisocial, or developed antisocial tendencies, because there's literally nothing to fucking do. Unless, of course, you're wealthy, because if you zoom out, there are literally more golf courses than there are homes. What the fuck? Why are there so many golf courses? An exclusively rich person hobby that, for one, takes up immense amounts of resources as it pertains to water, produce almost no value for the fucking area that they're in. Look at this. This single golf course on the outskirts of this city is about the size of a third of the fucking city. Look at that. Bulldoze this motherfucker. Keep all the foliage, of course. Zone it for mixed zoning, commercial, residential. Make it walkable, have good public transit, and be bikeable. And people can go everywhere and get together. These motherfuckers on the right wing are always like, oh my god, we have to return. We gotta return to tradition. We gotta return to the old days. All this modern bullshit. It's fucking with everything, man. But this might come as a shock to you, but cars haven't always existed. In fact, when Americans visit countries that were built and cities that were built before cars existed, they often look at them and are like, holy shit, is this a fucking fantasy land? Am I in a Disney movie? Because they look like this. Because they look like the fucking Netherlands. Because they look like motherfucking Amsterdam. Like even this place, Leiden, which I know nothing about. Look at this place. We've got all manner of fucking businesses and residential in the same area, which is insane of a concept. Like, imagine being able to exit your home and walk to get groceries, or bike to go to your favorite cafe, or walk to your friend's house as a kid, to bike to school. Look at this shit. Are you ready? I'll just plop myself down in some random ass place. Right here. Well, maybe that's not the best because there's construction going on. But look at this. You got some small ass fucking roads. You got bikes all over the place. You want to know why? Because you can bike to get wherever you need here. You can go from your home, which let's say is over here, because usually it's mixed zoning, not always, but a lot of the times it is, and you can just walk to whatever shop here. Though this is not the best example, unfortunately. But you don't have to go far to find good examples. Oh, would you look at this? All these bikes on the side of the road. You got these tiny ass roads, because it turns out, When you give people options as to how they're going to navigate an area, they're probably going to pick the one with the path of least resistance. And oftentimes, cities in the Netherlands are built around making biking and public transit the more efficient, faster routes than cars, because they understand that before cars there were people, because they understand that it's probably a good idea to orient your cities around human beings and not machines like an automobile, because cars didn't exist way back when. Places literally used to be exclusively for humans. And the people in the United States have been so conditioned to not being aware of it, to not knowing that it's possible, that they are content with the suburbs. And in fact, they've been fed this lie that the suburbs are the American dream, that owning your home in the suburbs, having, 1.5 kids, a dog, and a car is the American dream. You end up getting shit like this, where there's nothing to fucking do except stay inside, be online all day, or be forced to have a car to get anywhere. Look at this shit. What the fuck is this trash, man? Look at this. What is this intersection? This is fucking massive. Why? Why are these roads so wide? You don't really need them to be. Also, literally no biking infrastructure. Fuck you if you're biking here, you're gonna get run over by a car. Whereas places like this, oh, well, you could bike over here like these motherfuckers are. Because there aren't a lot of cars on this street, because cars are only supposed to be here to park, to go to their place, or to leave to get onto this road, which is only for fucking cars. Not only does it make it so that these only for cars roads are a smoother ride for the drivers on them, making the experience of being a driver on a road better, it also makes it safer for the people not driving, people walking, people biking. And like I say, this is not even the best example. It's just one of them. If you're living in a place like this, it is really not shocking. Tell me, you're not in a car right now. You want to be here? You want to be walking on the side of this road. You want to have walked from those suburbs we were just looking at to here, to buy clothes, to get food, to hang out with your friends. No, the fuck you don't. Why would you? This is for cars. This is what this place is for. It's for cars. That's why it's all cars here. That's why you see almost nobody walking and nobody cycling in any of this. Because it's not for you. It's not for humans. Because it's not built for humans. It's built for cars. You're not a car, motherfucker. Which is all to say that it is really not shocking that people coming from a place like this feel like there's no point to life. Because there's nothing for them to do. There is literally nothing to do. Unless you're a golfer. And there's a billion fucking golf courses around. For some unknown reason. I bring all this up not only to try to give you some information about how people will feel alienated in a place like this, no shit, but also those people might be more receptive to bigotry, to racist ideas, because they're secluded. Usually, suburbs are going to tend to skew higher in income, and unfortunately, because of a variety of oppressions baked into the fabric of this country, the higher in income you go, the less likely you are to find a black or brown person there. The lack of exposure that you have there gives you these rural and suburban areas that are more and more likely to vote Republican, which is why those big cities are more and more likely to vote Democrat, which are more likely to be left-leaning, because they are exposed to different ideas, different people. Their ideas, their preconceptions are challenged. They're not afraid of different people like conservatives are. They learn about others, they understand that they're just people like they are, and they go on with their fucking day. They don't obsess over them like people like Ron DeSantis, like Jordan Peterson, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like Lauren Boebert, because they're normal fucking people, unlike those people. Part of me wonders if the people that push for this kind of infrastructure kind of understand that. This kind of shit leads people to be more disconnected, more alienated, less likely to stand in solidarity with their fellow human being. And if not, it's just a happy byproduct. Of course, it's good for the automobile industry because you need a car to live here. And because this is supposed to end on a more positive note, I do want to shout out people like Not Just Bikes, people like Alan Fisher. I highly encourage, and I'll link to this in the description, Not Just Bikes' video, Why We Won't Raise Our Kids in Suburbia. He goes through a lot of this in better detail with pretty pictures, and it's really good. The reason why I like content like this is because it is inherently hopeful. The entire idea behind urbanist channels like this, behind channels that focus on infrastructure and public transit and walkable cities, is that it is inherently hopeful. It is about diagnosing problems as they exist, contrasting those problems to places that do it better, buttressing those points with data and statistics about how it can be done better and how it benefits the people that live there, and provides a way for you to get there. Opens your eyes about that if you've only known American suburbia and the cities in America that are subpar by comparison, and your mind is fucking clouded by this idea that this is the way it has to be. It's not. It's not even fucking close. Visit Europe, which, you know, most of you probably can't because you're poor, and I've never visited Europe because I've never had the money to do it. But watch those fucking Disney films that are based in areas that aren't overrun by goddamn cars. Understand that that shit exists in the real world, and we could have it here. We just have to have the will to do it. We are literally the richest country the face of the earth has ever fucking seen, for now. We could do it, we just don't have the will to. I encourage you all to watch these videos because you'll probably become addicted to them after watching 1 or 2 of them, and then try to get active in your local community about pushing for things that you could see to be better. I know for me, I lived like 25 years of my life not knowing any of this shit, 26 years of my life not knowing any of this shit, and as soon as I started watching these videos, my fucking eyes opened about it. And then as soon as I started moving through the area I lived in, which now is a city, but it's still not even as good as it could be, I'm literally looking at the world through a different lens. I'm noticing places where the infrastructure could be a lot better and get more cars off the road, make it easier for people to live there. What the fuck is freedom if not being able to walk out of your house and just go and just walk to a place, get on a bike, get in public transit at low cost or free if you're walking, get the good or service you need, and get the fuck home the same way? What is freedom if not that? How the fuck is it free that you literally have to buy a car that you don't even get a subsidy for from the state, even though the state is forcing you by its bad infrastructural decisions to have one? How the fuck is that freedom? It doesn't make any sense. You've been propagandized to, you've been indoctrinated, and you need to get the fuck out of it. And this is a good way to do it, okay? Highly recommend. I will link it in the description. You have to watch this fucking video, okay? And all of the other ones. I encourage you all to get active in your local communities, raise hell to your local politicians, and try to get these changes happening. Because the more cities we can point to in this country that reflect even a fraction of what you can see in not even the best example in the Netherlands, the more we have as examples, the better of a case that we will have to do it in all the places that we can. This is not to say that we need to outlaw cars. This is not to say that rural places have to become cities, because you can't do that. Those places still have to exist. But the funny thing about that is, just really quickly while I'm on this fucking tangent, walkable cities, bikeable cities, dense populations actually help farmers. If you look at the map of the Netherlands, you'll notice there is a shitload of farms here. Holy shit, is there a shitload of farms. But there's also these walkable ass cities, bikeable ass cities, public transitable ass cities where you don't need a car all around it. You want to know why they have all this space for their farms? If you're a farmer out there, if you're interested in living in a rural place, if you're interested in living off the land, because they don't have this shit. Because they don't have endless sprawling suburbia taking up all the fucking room. The reason why the United States outsources a lot of its agriculture to other countries is, one, because, you know, it's more profitable for corporations to do this. And for two, it's easier to exploit those countries more than it is here because we have, you know, some semblance of labor protections, but also because there's no fucking room for it. Where are you gonna farm here, man? You got endless sprawl. And perhaps this isn't the best, you know, soil for it, but there are so many examples of this. It is literally better all around, and I highly encourage you to look into to Not Just Bikes, to Alan Fisher, to Adam Something, to a variety of other channels that talk about this shit. Because for me, anyway, it gives me a lot of hope for the future. I have this kind of nihilistic optimism about me, where I am very well aware that things are going to hell in the handbasket, but I believe that we should fight as hard as we can to make it as good as it is. You know, in my view, life doesn't have any inherent meaning, which is all the more reason why you should fight to make it as meaningful as you possibly can. And as such, the idea of, even if I don't see it in my lifetime, cities around this country starting to look more and more like the walkable ass cities that have across the board better metrics than we do as it pertains to the happiness, the productivity of their citizens, it gives me hope that that could be a possible future. And I hope it does for you too, because we all need a little bit of hope in this fucking shithole of a country we live in right now, and in the moment that we're living in. But anyway, I've been rambling enough. Hope you had a good time. Hope you had a fun time. Hope it wasn't too much of a damper, and hope the ending was able to lift your spirits a little bit. And also, sorry, Hyperaggressive, for a 2.5-hour VOD. I am recording this at fucking 6 a.m. currently, 6:15, and I started it 2.5 hours ago. So I'm also sacrificing here, all right? And I hope you have a good one. Right? Best of luck out there. Get active, get mad, do what you can to help the people that you can. Organize in your communities and reduce as much harm as possible that will be wrought to them by the inaction or the overt bad action of the federal government and your state governments and do the damn thing. So I'm recording this 2 days after the recording that you're currently watching, and I know I have been or will about to be talking a lot of shit about Joe Brandon and the fact that Democrats, generally speaking, have been woefully inadequate when it comes to the Roe v. Wade overturn and the attempts to, 1, protect our civil rights in this moment, and 2, protect our elections, like we've already talked about. Brandon has decided to sign some executive orders to try to protect abortion access people in this country. We got Steve Bannon, kind of a sus name, on MSNBC. The process of overturning Roe v. Wade took decades. It was an expensive, multifaceted campaign, which was difficult to pull off, and then they did it. Democrats should probably put that amount of effort in, but to secure and expand our civil rights and liberties. But anyway. For reproductive rights advocates, undoing what Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices have done will also take time and effort, though President Joe Brandon helped get that process underway in earnest this afternoon with a new executive order on protecting abortion access, NBC News reported. Quote, the order aims to safeguard access to reproductive health care services, including abortion and contraception, protect patients' privacy and access to accurate information, promote the safety and security of patients, providers, and clinics, the White House said in a release. To be sure, executive orders are often limited in scope and as powerful as the American presidency can be. Contrary to what right-wingers would have you believe, Biden can't unilaterally snap his fingers and restore reproductive rights nationwide. But according to a White House summary, Biden's new order isn't just hollow, face-saving exercise of a Democratic president going through the motions, because if it was, he would have done it already. But instead of that, they did nothing but say, you gotta vote, Jack, and a bunch of other flowery rhetoric, and no real clear direction as to how the people can help outside of simply voting in November. There are some worthwhile measures in the broader policy, including the Department of Health and Human Services will expand access to abortion care through medication, the pill. The White House and Attorney General Merrick Garland's office will convene, quote, private pro bono attorneys, bar associations, and public interest organizations to encourage robust legal representation of patients, providers, and third parties lawfully seeking or offering reproductive health care services throughout the country. This is pretty nice. A lot of the litigation that people will have to be subject to when trying to get their health care is, for most people, you would imagine, an insurmountable hill because you got to pay for those lawyers. So the fact that they are going to provide pro bono attorneys, etc., for people is very helpful. This will apparently include protecting the right to travel out of state to seek reproductive care. The administration is prioritizing patient privacy, including taking new steps to prevent the transfer and sales of sensitive health data and blocking digital surveillance related to reproductive healthcare services. So this is a big thing that a lot of people are talking about. How in the digital age, in the NSA is spying on everybody in their grandmother age and knows everything about you because of a variety of things that is collected about you as you use the internet and then sold to a variety of other corporations. Protecting all of that information is, I think, a good step to stop would-be haters of humanity from going after people who have gotten abortions and using that data to try to find them and build a case around them. This will apparently include enlisting the Federal Trade Commission to protect the privacy of people seeking information on abortion services. Obviously, reproductive rights advocates will keep their celebrations in check in response to an order like this. It's not as if anyone's going to say, woo, problem solved. But for those who pushed the White House for a more robust response to the Supreme Court Dobbs ruling, this is certainly a start. And it is going to be very, you would imagine, hopefully, maybe, a little bit more inspiring to, in the context of the Democratic Party, get people to go out and vote to increase the margins in the Congress, to get Democrats in the state legislatures of these states wherever possible, hopefully get Democrat governors in places like Pennsylvania, for instance. I just got stun-locked on that a little bit ago. Josh Shapiro, no relation, is the Democrat there, and you should vote for him because he's going to be better than Mastriano or whatever the fuck, who was literally said that if he was governor in 2022, he would have overturned the electors and given the electoral votes in PA to Trump, and PA is a swing state. Fucking vote if you're in November for Josh Shapiro. What I saw on his platform at least seemed pretty good, like better than most, standard Democrats, but it's still better. Do it. It's also a foundation Biden seems prepared to build on just as soon as Congress sends him legislation to codify abortion rights. The president said before signing his executive order, quote, we need 2 additional pro-choice senators and a pro-choice House. So a lot of people were critiquing his, just vote, Jack, look alive, go to the polls, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, rest in peace, the creator of. People were shitting on him for not being super direct about what exactly is necessary. So saying we need 2 additional pro-choice senators is certainly a good step past the vaguity of just vote. So that's potentially helpful as well. Biden added that the Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices effectively dared the electorate to choose a Congress that would protect reproductive rights. Quote, vote, 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 the president said. Consider the challenge accepted, court. Now, like we'll have already gotten into, all that vote, vote, vote shit don't matter if the independent state legislature Doction bunk theory is allowed to be the law of the land, as it were, in Moore v. Harper, that Supreme Court decision that will come up at some point after the Supreme Court comes back from their nice little summer vacation. But we've got a slim chance to maybe stop the bleeding a little bit. Of course, like I've always said, electoralism is not and will never be enough to fully realize just how good the people in this country should have it and could have it, but it is certainly the bare minimum. If it is easy for you to vote, vote for the best option in the Democratic Party in the primary, vote for the least bad option in the general, which is unfortunately the Democrats. And also, if you don't like that abusive relationship, like I don't, try to get a proportional voting system implemented at the local level in your area. Find groups like Fair Vote and other things like that to maybe mobilize people through provisional ballot measures, to get ranked choice voting or some other kind of proportional voting system, to move away from first past the post so that third parties are eventually viable in those areas. And then you build upon that and hopefully at some point get it statewide and then federal. And hopefully we move away from first past the post at some point in our federal elections and don't have to get stuck in this fucking two-party system. But anyway, it's unfortunately what we got to do here. And to suggest not voting in this moment, while the Democrats say all that because a lot of them at least seem to not necessarily care as much about the things that we as left-wingers, leftists care about. But when you hear a lefty, a leftist like me, talk about how important it is to vote if it is easy for you to do, obviously I'm not using that same frame of reference. So don't fucking disrespect my intelligence. Like you're assuming that I think electoralism is the only way any change can happen. Don't be a fucking bitch. Anyway, that's it. This video is going to call it as Black Hat Devil Dancer. Thanks for the support. I hope you continue to enjoy the things I upload to the internet. If you would like to be the next CONURE call out, all you got to do is follow me on Twitter at CONURECC, retweet my video links when they go live. Remember to subscribe to the channel, put all notifications on when you hit the bell, leave a like if you'd like, put a comment down below about how suburbs suck, but they can be made better. And generally speaking, the United States could be a better place to be for all people involved. And have a good day. All 5 of those things.